let's jump in.
And this one's a good one.
Were you okay? Cool.
Because it's very relevant to something I'm working on right now. And I don't know if I had sent you the link before, but I'm very interested with print on demand businesses, and this one is the engine behind those businesses. So very interesting topic.
All right, no doubt. That's a good start for us. All right, welcome back. Acquire and operate for the love of the game. Hoo-yah. Kjael's back. I ran Dolo for the performance wrap, which was basically me just stuttering and blabbling, but hopefully it was useful. But you can count on a way more dynamic. We got the energy back from our boy. So let's jump in. Issue 16, we got a deal teardown here. Workflow Management SaaS for print-on-demand facilities, rocking 437k ARR. And a quick sneak peek at the issue ahead. We're gonna rip on the deal teardown today, and then we've got an operating concept coming for you next week, an OKR teardown. And the operating concept, this one's very near and dear to Kjael's heart, so expect me to just kind of be a fly on the wall, but it's gonna be mapping the buyer journey to inform content gaps and beyond. Content gaps, workflow, prompts, buyer journey, KPIs, tech stack. The buyer journey is the root. So once you have a
how do you report on all of that?
Yeah, so it's a dope topic, but a good actionable template that we're providing. So hopefully that'll jumpstart a lot of folks. And then jumping into the OKR teardown, which is decision-making framework for strategic investments, so ranging from product to growth, et cetera. And then our portfolio performance wrap, it's going to catch us at like 3/4 through sprint 4. So it'll be more of an update, but let's get on with the show. So Workflow Management SaaS for print on demand. Asking price is $325. You might be scratching your head like, huh?
Well, before we go into the numbers, I would like to start with, let's define it for the audience. One, what is a print-on-demand facility? Because it has a variety of meanings. And then two, we know what workflow management means, but workflow management as a SaaS company, what does that mean? So let's back it up. Print-on-demand in its simplest definition. You want to run a t-shirt printing shop. You had a t-shirt idea, or you had a mug idea, or you had a favorite quote. Let's say, giddy up, right? We wanted to throw that on a mug. But what we didn't want to do was pay the upfront cost of all of that printing and then hold the inventory on site, because we know inventory costs money for storage and for printing. So what do? We target a print-on-demand facility. They're not only going to take your idea, take your specifications, they're going to say, okay, how many of these do you need printed in the beginning? How much demand do you have right now? You say, you know what, I maybe have 20 people that can buy this. They'll say, get to 25 people and we will print your mug for $2. You can sell it back for $10 and you immediately capture an 80% profit margin off the rip on every sale. You don't have to wait for inventory. They handle the shipping, the productization, the branding, they handle all of it for you. That is print on demand. Good.
And a few comments there too, right? Like I think so. The headwind or the tailwinds here are e-commerce, which is absolutely ripping. Like there's and in the industry outlook, it's like, whoa, this category is exciting. So you have kind of e-commerce ripping, the tendency towards customization for products, period, and variants, and bringing that capability to the consumer. And then a preference away from carrying inventory for all the issues that you just discussed, right? Because I remember, I'm going to butcher the details a little bit, but the youngest Jenner, when she started her lipstick company, she got it to, and obviously she's got 300 million, and so she has distribution and attention on lock at like an insane scale. But she got her makeup company to like X billion dollars in valuation, doing hundreds of millions in revenue, and she had like 4 employees. Because she had her whole supply chain was outsourced. It was drop shipping, ding to bing to bing to bing to bing to bing. The returns were all outsourced. And so you can assemble these building blocks in e-commerce where you can run super light from an operating model perspective. So e-com buzzing, print on demand buzzing. Cool. Now that into workflows.
Yep. And to add to that point, before we dive into workflows, we started this conversation with talking about AI. If you were to even go to AI today and say, hey, how do I make money fastest? How do I make $1,000 the fastest online without, leaving bed, leaving home? print on demand is one of the top recommended options. There's a small business playbook. If you tune into that on CNBC, there's an article about a kid who's generating $15,000 a month just off of print on demand in 30 days or less. And AI helped him set the whole thing up on Amazon. It's for the general, and it's also for the local consumer. It's accessible and democratized for everyone. Now, because it's so democratized and everyone is trying to get into this, you can look at places like Shopify and Overlow, where they have nothing but 20, 30, 40 print-on-demand vendors, right? I'm going to throw one out called Printful. Printful, they have the best SEO in the game. Everyone knows about Printful, right? The challenge is
definitely the number one competitor when I did some auditing that way.
Exactly. Now, the challenge with Printful, they now have 30 plus competitors in a massively saturated and growing industry. Now, if it's supposed to go from 5 billion to a valuation of $39 billion in this industry, how is Printful going to stay competitive? Now we get into workflow management. If every person in e-commerce wants to play, these companies needs to streamline their order fulfillment process better. Because you lose customers and you lose money the longer it takes to print and then deliver. So with workflow management, what we're talking about today is essentially, if you think about RevOps as a whole, marketing, sales, and then you come down to product. The product is the fulfillment. If these companies cannot operate sufficiently or efficiently, then they lose money. Workflow management on the flip side is we come in and we tell you how to take an order from just an idea from a request from a customer and how to get it to them in the most efficient manner by following supply chain logistics, where things aren't going to start falling apart like they did in the pandemic. That's why this business is so important now. The challenge is, how do you streamline that implementation process within a company?
Or like OG, like Larry Ellison, right? When they started selling just kind of business management software once upon a time, he's like, there was such variance in the workflows, everybody requested custom software. And he's like, no,
exactly.
Map your workflows to how they're represented in the software and go, baby, go. And that's kind of a natural tension that's existed in SaaS, since the beginning. But to your point, if we apply just kind of some general frameworks here, you think about client lifecycle is my favorite framework for just about anything specific to workflow. So it's like, hey, but we don't even know what our workflow is. Okay, let's just follow an order through the business, right? Okay,
follow your customer.
Right, or follow our customer follow the dollar through the business is the OG one, right? And then it's like, okay. And simply put, you're trying to get to outcomes as efficiently and cost effectively as possible. The faster you can get to that outcome or that output, the better its contribution to margin. So as you noted, right, the category gets increasingly competitive. The difference between getting a delivery done with 90 units of energy versus getting a delivery done with 70 units of energy is 20 units of time, energy, however you want to codify that and quantify it. So workflow becomes very important, to your point. So excellent, dude. This is some very good context, kind of foundation setting. So let's so we'll go into deal, and for those that maybe haven't tuned in a lot, we usually break this down with a firm profile. Our scaling ventures kind of proprietary, hate to say that word out loud, but our, I guess, objective scorecard is probably more accurate. And then we do a quick, like a riff on a SWOT analysis. So we'll look at strengths, we'll look at risk factors, we'll look at quick wins and opportunities, and then we'll look at some market comps in terms of the actual deal itself. And then we model out some light return scenarios. But again, there's not a ton of rigor on these return scenarios. So we take it from the top. Asking price, 325. Trailing 12-month revenues, 437k. So that's a less than 1x multiple.
Red flag.
Which it's also like you're salivating, because it's like, holy shit, this is like a mansion trading at a huge discount. And it's like, okay, but on the other side of the coin,
Great for us. Yeah, great for us, but why the liquidation event?
Exactly. So seller motivation, well below comparable multiples. And in terms of industry tailwinds, all this stuff is what you want to see. So they've been around for a year and a half or so. We commented on this. The multiple is 0.7x. Trailing 12-month profits, 96k. So if they're doing 437, I mean, I guess what do we look for generally in terms of like base rate profit margin for a SaaS business? Doesn't have to be that specific.
Yeah, I was thinking the retention rates are at 70%. For the profit margin, I was trying to think, is that like 20 or 30%? I can't remember.
Well, our figure, because and what the beauty of SaaS, right, is that you build it and your cost to serve is zero, right? You have to pay an incremental cost on
true, yeah.
the hosting side. So ideally, all your costs are incurred up front, and then after that, you've built it and you deliver it for free over the internet. So profit margins are really good. So you want to see at least a 50% profit margin, kind of as a base case.
Yeah.
And then there's a discussion around gross versus net margins, but generally speaking, this is not nearly as profitable as what you would consider for a SaaS business. So then if we start to tie some of the threads together, it's like strange lack of profitability, very low multiple. Have they been unable? And then you think about workflow centric SaaS. Is the cost of implementation totally crushing the unit economics? You just kind of follow the breadcrumbs, and all of a sudden you start to I guess, establish a point of view.
Wow. And it's been less than a year.
And there's only three heads, because the quickest way to rationalize a broken profit margin is like, oh shit, they have a bloated team. And there's a lot we can do to change the cost structure in the business. But you look at it, it's like, all right, 3, and then it's like, all right, they must be really struggling to activate customers, et cetera. So that's, again, yellow flag, kind of a smoking gun situation. Product stack, lean and mean, React, Next.js.
Yeah, I think that's a good inclination towards, like you were mentioning, the gross margin. Gross margin should be above 90% because you just build it and you serve. And then when we think net margin, now you're taking into consideration team, payroll, taxes, all of that good stuff. So with
marketing,
gross margins should be above 90% with a product, with a tech stack that lean.
Totally. Cool. So cumulatively on the scorecard, and scorecards are tricky, right? Because there's some stuff that you score low because it's punitive, but it represents transformation. So, and our thinking that way needs to evolve. Because, I guess, said another way, what is low scoring and pulls down the scorecard average is actually good from a private equity and from our thesis and kind of how we get down perspective. So anywho, landed at it.
Before we move on from that point, I do have a question.
Shoot.
Now, while we try to be as objective as possible, we've always discussed potentially there's a chance for qualitative analysis within the scorecard. So if we see that most of the quantitative factors are pulling the score down, where it's creating maybe an opportunity for transformation, is there a world where you see adding in another factor to say, okay, chance for transformation, score it between 1 to 5. And then that can potentially pull the score up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Well, where we've landed, and the objectivity comes from the base kind of function that is this identical attributes, right? So instead of being like, well, we kind of like this business, and well, maybe we like this one more, it's like a scorecard of any kind. Based on these 5 attributes, what's the cumulative score? Because the tendency then is you get into kind of a washing machine thought process where it's like, well, I like this emotional and this thing and that thing, and then it's like, okay, we don't want to do that. But if you think about how our scorecard functions, right, it's 1 not great, 4 outstanding. So just the same with like base rates with churn, like, or if you look at growth, what's good is on the right side of median. So if we're just thinking about a bell curve, a standard deviation. In the middle is median, towards the right generally is good, it's better. With churn, you want lower numbers. So it's basically, where does it fall on either side of the bell curve? And the beauty of a score that's 1 to 4 is there's no middle, because the tendency, if it's 1 to 5, everyone puts 3s, and it's like, oh shit, that's totally not useful. So we usually think, so if it's like, hey, the multiple is low, we reward that, right? So it's like, oh, we'll give it a 3 out of 4. That's attractive. But in the same sense, we need to use, and then also we want the scorecard at these stages, using public information, to be quantifiable. So it's like, because that feeds into an algorithm. Due diligence. Yeah. And then when it's due diligence, then there's more more art than science. You have to form an objective view on the industry outlook. And there's some quantifiable numbers there, but customer interviews, how do you kind of interpret their perspective? Are they an advocate, or et cetera, promoter?
That's perfect. So anywho, wanted it to be a devil's advocate question for the audience.
No, that's good. That's good. Always. Or why? Tell me why. And I would say on average, I'm going to start to actually, now that we've got a huge critical mass of deals that we've scored, start to show where this falls in our standard distribution of deals. Ooh, so 2.8 would be just above me, like kind of top quartile-ish. Cool. So some strengths, and I guess everything we've kind of spoken about as a teaser. So now we'll just take our time to kind of lean in a little bit to these topics. But so revenue multiple. So in SaaS, and there's some, you think it's almost always a function of ARR versus EBITDA or net income. And it's almost always a premium on the dollar. So service businesses maybe trade just above $1. So they're like, hey, you're making 100 grand, this business is worth 100 grand. And that's usually because there's not much predictability. There's not much repeatability in the transactions. So SaaS is like, we have these revenues, they're contracted with customers and they're predictable into the future and they're enduring. And we can kind of predict what these revenues look like. The market loves that. Investors love that because it de-risks, their perspective on the future outlook of the business. So at minimum, SaaS businesses are trade, and then there's a discount based on scale, which I've vocalized that I disagree with, right? Where they're like, hey, I'm like, hey, you look at a business that's doing $1 million and it's netted 500K for 3 or 4 years. It's a pretty enduring business. Like, I'll take the discount on the multiple because it's not a $5 million business, but if it depends on the vector and how you think about it. I'm rewarding enduring profitability, validated product market fit, et cetera. So all to say, a sub 1x multiple is like, oh my God, yes, radical. And you see this manifest in the returns. It's like, holy shit. But on the other side, it's like, they're selling this like they're slanging consulting, right? And then all the IPs between the owner's ears. And it's like, okay, anyway, so this is in the something must be wrong bucket. The one thing, and I'd love your take on this because you're obviously more schooled on the e-com side, is so they disclose pricing as like a monthly subscription, okay, no brainer, plus a take rate on the spread of cost of goods. And my interpretation, and tell me where you fall, is that the spread of cost of goods is either your let's just say $100 is what you're selling. It costs you, your cost of goods sold are $20, and that involves all your janky workflows. We come in, we've reduced your cost of goods sold to $10 because of way more efficient workflow. We're going to take a percentage of that $10 that we just saved you. That's one take. That's one take, right? The other is we've improved like we basically improved the perceived value because your cost is, or your time to delivery is much faster. And so it's actually that the cost of goods sold is kind of, because that's mainly a function of inputs, right? And lemons at the lemonade stand. But now you can sell $100 thing for $110. We want a chunk of that $10. Option A, B, or Kjael, holy shit, you're off base.
So it's actually option D. It's a little bit of both because it depends on the situation. And here's why. Again, the market is so saturated, you're going to find the institutional players like Printful who have strategic partnerships with the Obolo and the Shopifys of the world. But then you're going to find those newer print-on-demand shops where they don't have their operations figured out. So they may be more open to a revenue share agreement where, hey, if we reduce, option one, if we reduce your cost of goods sold to generate this product for your customer, once we start to monitor what those percentages look like, we're just going to say, okay, we'll take 3 to 5% of that decrease.
Okay.
Because the whole purpose of this business is to reduce that cost of goods sold expense, right? That gross margin, they want to increase that gross margin. So with unstructured businesses that are brand new, it's going to be more of a percentage because they want to figure that out together. But with more institutionalized businesses, they're going to say, no, we know our numbers. It takes us $2 to print that mug we talked about earlier. If you can get us down to $1.50, we'll give you 20 cents of the 50-cent savings.
Okay, beautiful. So I think all to say that regardless, we like these pricing models because it aligns long-term incentives.
And there's options.
Where it's like, hey, we're going to charge you a monthly fee, and that's that. Whether shit hits the fan for the business or you spank it into the stratosphere, doesn't matter.
That's your access fee.
Versus like, yo, the more successful you are by this measure, the more value we're creating for you, and we're going to tax you for that value. So at the end of the day, it feels like a rev share. It's like some kind of shared success fee based on kind of mutually desired outcomes. So that's
what you negotiate.
Yeah. So industry outlook of most of the industries that I've looked at, this is definitely the most interesting in terms of growth trajectory. But then that on the other side of the coin, right? There's always two sides of the coin. The riches are in the niches, especially in micro SaaS. And so it's like, hey, we're not the only ones looking at this. It's like, okay, we've got a $5 billion thing that's going to scale up to 39 billion in 8 years with a compounded annual growth rate of 26%. That's absolutely totally out. That's like 500%, what GDP is forecasted to grow. So it's like,
Yep.
ooh, big market that's growing. Venture capitalists are like, oh boy, let's throw $100 million at Printful, go, take the market. And then, Micro SaaS groups get sneezed on and we die. But and all the stuff that we had elaborated on. So apparel is dominant. Everybody wants custom shit, products, jewelry, fashion accessories, tech accessories. Basically, there's no end to what you can print something on.
Yeah, it's like the whole AI development space. Any one of these industries that you can democratize and then flip into B2B to C, when you get down to that C and you allow the consumers to play within your industry, and now they're creating their own niches using your products, and now you have a product to help them manage their entities, their ideas, their businesses, their products more efficiently. Yeah, it's just people that are driving the growth. You've democratized the space, and you're now having consumers driving the growth. And now you're helping those businesses that are helping the consumers drive the growth. You're always going to win. You just got to figure out a way to do it efficiently. So you're not trading like consulting or service businesses. You're not trading labor for time and money. Like that's what we have to avoid.
Love it. Cool. So industry's slapping, but maybe to the extent where we're like, ooh, we're going to players that we don't want to compete with because they've got big, war chests, might enter the equation. And I think what evidence do we have of that? Cool. Let's look at the competitive set. Let's look at funding events. Let's see which venture shops are involved. And that might put the fear of God in us, but,
and let's look at Shopify and Overlow, who have been in talks with either building a solution like this themselves. And if that doesn't work in the next few years, what are they going to do? They're going to implement a roll-up strategy and start grabbing some of these partners if they're not doing well financially.
M&As, yeah, totally. So profit margin, we touched on this, 20%, 1% profit margin is, and I would say generally, so our scorecard also has weights because that's critical, right? Certain attributes are more impactful than others, and you need to just use a simple weighting methodology for that. So for us, profit margin gets a low weight because our assumption is like, we're not going to take the operating model for face value and run with it. We're going to analyze it and be like, like these fixed costs should be variable costs. You're not exploiting global labor markets. You're not using contractual fractional labor, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of leverage there, but you look at it.
If I can add to that, the reason why we weight it low is because we're looking for an opportunity to spank it. We want to be the ones to come in and transform the operating model for that 3 to 5x IRR.
Yeah, and like simply put, right? You can grow revenue, or you can improve margin. That's it. And it's like, okay, but improving margin is diminishing returns, right? You can only eke out so many units, and then eventually you're like, yo, this is the skeleton bone. The only way we're going to create more enterprise value is to grow revenue. If you can do both at the same time, happy days. You turn something that's worth this, and you turn it into something that's 40% more valuable. But cool. So implementation requirements. So we always talk about sell pain medication, not vitamins. And so, or like, how critical is this in the day-to-day operations? Other ways to think about it: need to haves versus nice to haves, et cetera. There are a lot of concepts around that, but on the good side of the coin, workflow software is just a function of typically automation and data. And that's software down the middle. Like, hey, when you click this, it does this, and you don't have to do this anymore. And when someone does this, we're going to take that data and put it over here so everybody can see it. So workflow automation is like SaaS, tried and true, basic as it gets. And you want to be as close to the core outcomes, right? Where it's like, oh, this software touches how you process orders. Okay, that's sticky as shit. It's going to be painful to change. It's going to be disruptive to the business to change versus, oh, this thing does this thing that's kind of nice. And it's like, all right, great. You don't want to be in that position. So on the good side of the coin for this deal, spinal cord tech, right? Central nervous system tech.
Once you're in, they can't just rip you out. Like, that's what we want.
And it touches everything that needs to happen, right? On the other side of the coin is, well, we don't want to do it that way. We want it to go like this. Can the software do that? And it's like, oh boy. Or it's like, okay, we need an implementation, or we need a SaaS that is like 60% baked, 60 to 80% baked. And we're going to bake.
You want 80%.
we're going to bake the remaining 40 to 20 as a function of implementation, which is like, let's turn this knob up, let's turn this one down, let's, massage this thing. So
right. In
that,
product development, if I'm putting on my product management hat, you always want your product to deliver. If we think about Salesforce, HubSpot, whatever, you notice how every tool gets you about 80 to 90% of the way there. And then it's like API integrations or whatever. You want your tool to get as close as possible. And then you play with Pareto principle. What else do we need to optimize with the remaining 20%? Because we know what we've delivered already covers most of the needs. So we only need to customize and build for that 20% of requests. Product feedback, that's the roadmap.
And you speak of some interesting concepts there, because like, if you look at, because then the decision point and what's probably happening here is like, okay, we need humans to implement this.
Yes.
There's too much variance from customer to customer in their workflow. They can't get there on their own, so they're not going to make a purchasing decision. There will be no behavior change, no adoption. Decision one is and it's kind of a build, partner, buy conversation, right? And it's like, cool, we're going to build these capabilities in-house. The alternative is you partner and you stand up ecosystems of HubSpot certified implementers, Salesforce certified admins, and you basically outsource that from your cost structure. The cost is still a burden on the customer, on the user, but there's some different flavors of this. But bottom line, it ain't PLG.
Exactly.
This is like, oh boy, we got to move everybody into the new house, and oh God, and then we got them moved in, and they're like, oh shit, we want this couch in the other room, and it's like, oh boy. And that all the while costs are just going tink, 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 and your margins going tink, 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 and then you go, oh, so not great. Cool. So now let's switch gears, and we're going to talk about quick wins and opportunities, because there were two here that are very novel, at least from my perspective. And the first was to light up, like, and I was not really confident in how to write the headline here, but I went with new distribution channel and platform, because it's so rare where it's like, okay, we're selling our thing, like, hey, we're selling this in our little bodega and things are great, but there's a Costco that sells stuff like ours right over there, and all we have to do is put our thing on the shelf, right? And I guess it's very obvious in kind of, product and like traditional product sales, right? Like the holy grail is like, hey, I've got this new fitness bar, I'm going to get it on the shelves at Whole Foods, and bam, you light up distribution like crazy. But in our world, it's like, we're going to light up this channel, which is an ambassador channel. We're then going to test paid ads. There isn't like a store in most contexts that exists. And there are like app stores for, but then you're tethered to the platform, and that introduces platform risk, and that's the other side of the coin. In this instance, it's like, cool, we need to introduce our thing to the Shopify marketplace, where there's tens of thousands of vendors that are up in there all day, and we get almost instant distribution and exposure. The other side is now the platform risk is in the equation, where if Shopify's like, we don't want to do print on demand anymore. So if you become over reliant on that, or you're ranking because of one keyword in the Shopify search, and then all of a sudden somebody comes in and rips that keyword away from you, growth dies, etc. But very cool thing, period. Obviously, it comes with pros and cons.
So I had similarly two thoughts. First, on a distribution channel, but I framed it more as like a partnership channel. And then on the ICP side, I had some other ideas around that. So before I dive into, I'll go back to the risk factor. The risk factor is the solution itself. A big player like Shopify or Obolo can just say, hey, we have all the consumers and data and everything we need. We have the money. We're just going to build what you did, so we don't have to keep bringing you in to be the spinal cord behind all of these businesses that are on our platform, right? That's one risk. The other risk is the sales-led opportunity. We now need to outsource implementers or do the implementations ourselves. Here's the other risk factor with the sales-led opportunity. To really light up the the partnership channels for channel sales, and then to target that new ICP, you need people. And here's why I say that. For the channel partnership, I think of this like a Plaid. When you go to connect one financial platform to your bank, there's the Plaid and all of those tools where you've never heard of them before, but somehow the banks know of them. How did that happen? They've gone specifically to tech finance expos or fintech expos, events. They're in those directories, so the institutional players know who they are. The consumers don't need to know who they are. Some of the consumers are tied to the bank. The bank just needs someone to make their integrations easier, so they don't have to do custom API integrations. That's a new potential distribution or partnership channel we have. Now, within that channel, going into the ICP, with that channel, we now have multiple different players we can work with. We can work with the institutional players like the Obolo and the Shopify, but what would be really valuable for us is Shopify and Ovalo, they're all trying to get those local mom and pop shops signed up. Those local mom and pop shops, they have a lot of like limitations when they're signing up for these platforms. So what if we were to corner a piece of the market with the ICP of those that aren't captured by the Shopifys of the world? Now they're on our platform and we're partnered with Shopify. So Shopify is still sending their customers to use our tool, and we're direct targeting local mom and pop shops. If ever the industry becomes too saturated and someone looks at an M&A opportunity with us, or we look at an M&A opportunity with someone else, we can say, hey, we've grabbed more niches within this market that you don't have access to. We've just made ourselves a bit more valuable.
Totally. Or said another way, it's like, hey, we're going to do direct sales to these production facilities. We're then going to expand our TAM by introducing and accommodating a new ICP, which is merchants themselves. And where do they live and breathe? They're on Shopify. Cool. And so it's a function of kind of TAM expansion, doing the work to understand the tendencies and the behaviors of that segment of the TAM, identifying the appropriate channels, and then doing what needs to be to create access there.
Right.
Because I think what's very interesting right now is they're selling to the production facilities. And this becomes an interesting, like, okay, well, and then obviously you have to rethink the entire sales motion based on that buyer journey, but it's like, all right. And there's natural virality hypothetically baked into this, where it's like, I'm on the production facility side. It's like, hey, merchant, send me the orders from you, and you're aggregating the orders from your customers. We'll build it, or we'll take the coffee mugs and we'll slap the shit on them and we'll mail them to people. And they're like, okay, cool. Wait, what are you using to process your orders? Right? It's just like DocuSign. It's like, hey, I just signed this thing digitally. That was really slick. Okay, I'll start using it. So there's embedded virality in the product as a function of what the product delivers. But with that, there's a lot of challenges to think about. Okay, like, so essentially, it's like, hey, what can we sell to the merchants to create demand for what we're doing, and then as a function of that, generate exposure to the production facilities, and then the inverse of that, working through the production facilities first. So this is cool, and this is where you get crazy organic loops that explode, and basically, but then there's also the trade-off of the two-sided marketplace. You know, Andrew Chen's done a lot on that with Cold Start. How do you see the thing? You get into like networks and the atomic unit. Anyway, all to say, some interesting shit. And it's like, ooh, like, oh my
definitely
God.
An opportunity.
Because we're like, hey, let's grow at 30% year over year. This is like, maybe we grow it at 3,000% in 2 years, but we introduce a tremendous amount of risk. But anywho, I was like, wow, sick. I've never written about that. I've never really kind of seen that dynamic in a deal. And obviously all of this is kind of trending away from B2B SaaS, vertical SaaS, right? Like this is a little more e-commerce. This is a little more kind of weird shit that I'm not super experienced with. So
however, I will, even though it is leaning more into e-commerce, it could still be considered vertical SaaS because it is playing behind those bigger B2B SaaS companies, which I just love. It's an exploding industry and we're enabling that industry. So there got to be a large upside on the back end.
When it's like e-commerce, like e-commerce is here, print on demand is here, production facilities are there. So it's still a niche. All right, so we'll jam through these last things here. Market comps. So we looked at Micro SaaS trading at producing ARR between 400 and 500k. Comps for asking price 2.1 million. This firm's at 325k. That gets 3 thumbs up. Revenue multiple comparable is 4.18x. This firm's sitting at 0.7x. Another 3 thumbs up. And then we get into the trailing 12-month profit margin. So base rate profit margin there's 290k. So we're doing well below a third of that. Gave that 2 thumbs down. That probably could have been 3. And then we don't know what the growth rate is, but comparable growth rate is 64%. So that's juicy growth. Cool. So we'll go ahead and wrap with return scenarios. Again, these are kind of just directionally useful for us. We would never kind of base a decision on this, but quick disclaimer, right? So I introduced some very risky assumptions, re the improvements to cost structure. So I did kind of brass tacks, product and engineering, support, RevOps, a little bit of marketing, and then an implementation team. And again, just all kind of assumptions based on base rate labor costs. But you get into it then, and it's like, Okay. And I guess this is also an example of like, man, it's a lot easier to make money in private equity when you buy a solid asset at a huge discount. So that's almost half the battle. It's like, hey, we don't need to buy the dopest business. We just need to buy a business at a discount and then get it to what's like fair value. And we're going to walk away laughing at the bank. But our purchase price here, and I mean, that thing should be 375, 900, but seller note, they're going to carry 10% hopefully, which is 30K. And then we're going to lay out 61 grand. And then the remainder would be a debt instrument of some kind. So for our two scenarios, I kept it simple. We did median growth and median churn. Median churn for MRR between 25K and 100K is 4.2%. Median growth is 1%, which is net growth, right? So that's a function of churn. So basically said simply, churn's going to be at 4.2%. MRR growth is going to be at 5.2%, which gives us 1% net. And our OpEx is going to be 46% of our trailing 12-month ARR. We're going to exit at a 2, which would still be a discount, honestly. Like you'd probably want to see this thing at a 3 if you get to where you want to be KPI wise. Cool. What does that return profile look like? You guessed it, through the roof. So we break even half a year in, cash on cash returns are 352%. We're going to, gross proceeds on a 3-year timeline is 1.6 million. MOIC is through the roof. IRR is bananas. Thought
I want to buy this business.
Oh, buddy. Well, I think that's food for thought. Yeah, and timing is a thing, and yeah.
Let's see. Let's just talk after you get back from vacation. Yes, let's just see where we're at.
Or this is maybe one we don't want to disclose to the world, but
yeah.
Returns. I'm sorry. Second scenario, hit top quartile growth, which is interestingly only a 1% improvement. So now we're going to grow at 2% net on a monthly basis, which lands at about 36% growth. So top quartile growth, and we're going to stick with median churn. So that's got us at 4.2% churn and 6.2% growth. And we're going to keep the same cost structure, which is 46% of trailing 12-month ARR. We're going to exit at it too as well, even though at that growth rate, we could definitely command a better multiple. Where does that land us? Everything's better, a lot better. So obviously 323K in free cash flow a year on that 3-year timeline. We break even in a third of a year. Everything else is just bananas. So anywho, this is an interesting one. Obviously, there's a lot of action on the diligence side. Why the multiple? Why the messed up profit margin? Can anybody get in there and run it profitably? Can you get to the place where the juice is worth the squeeze? We like the category. There's some ginormous incumbents that could come and acquire, gobble up your shit and just, replicate your functionality, et cetera. So like all things, life, business, or otherwise, it's a game of trade-offs, and you assign weights to those trade-offs and make decisions and go. But interesting deal.
Interesting to say the least. I will say it's a great find. It's something I'm working in right now, literally looking at Printful and a few other platforms, and determining which one we're going to implement for my friend with that restaurant in Brooklyn I was telling you about before. Because now he's going to be selling merch, and I recommended, hey, you need to do print on demand to cut out your upfront costs, especially when you're bootstrapped.
Oh yeah. Or did you want another crazy segment? And obviously Taylor Swift has been dominating all things, but the amount of merch that gal sells is fucking insane. It's like she does the tours to sell merch. Like straight up.
You want to hear something crazier? Drake does the same, and no one knows. Even his 360 deal with Nike is a print on demand deal. In Drake's deal, Nike does not charge him for production costs. With his whole Knock the brand, they cover all of that for his name alone.
Have you seen, I'll text this to you, have you seen how he turned his house into a catalog, a digital catalog?
I didn't see that. What?
It's so sick. It's like curated by Dre. You're like, here's my living room. Oh shit, what's this candle? This is a Le Labo candle. You want to buy it? I'm making an affiliate
on Shopify. Yes.
It's
and then there's
so
the book,
sick.
and you can click the coffee table and it pops.
Yes.
And
they're like, this is the future of retail.
That is the future of retail, and that's why you need workflow management better, because it has to connect to each one of those points in the dude.
Or that's just a complexity of ecosystem. But yeah, obviously the world's always a crazy place, but there's some stuff that's popping off. So anyway, we can leave it at that. Acquire and operate for the love of the game. Thanks for tuning in. God bless. We'll catch you next week. Cheers.
Cheers.
Peace.